There are moments in life when silence says everything words cannot. When the air feels heavier than grief itself, and even your own heartbeat sounds like a stranger's echo. Tonight, that silence belonged to Sarah. She sat on the edge of a bed large enough to hold her dreams, but empty enough to remind her they'd already left. Her navy blue dress shimmered faintly under the soft gold light, the same light that once witnessed laughter in this very room, laughter that now existed only in her memory. Her phone screen glowed in her trembling hand, 5 missed calls. All to the same man, her husband, Tony. She whispered his name once, as if the sound might summon him. It didn't. Instead, another notification appeared. A message from the doctor. Stage 3 breast cancer. Words that shattered her world with the quiet cruelty only truth can deliver. But Tony wasn't home. He hadn't been for 3 nights. He was in Chicago, at least, that's what the business itinerary said. Sarah knew better. She knew Chicago meant Angela Frederick, the woman from his office, the one who laughed too loudly at his jokes and touched his arm like she'd earned the right to. And now, as Sarah sat in the stillness of their golden room, she realized she had become invisible in the life she helped him build. 20 years. 20 years of building a life, a company, an empire, together. She had been there when Tony's dream was nothing but a sketch on a napkin and a prayer whispered at midnight. She believed when no one else did. And when his empire finally rose, he built walls around his success so high, even she couldn't climb over them anymore. The mansion was beautiful. 7 bedrooms, marble floors, a private theater, everything they had once dreamed of when they had nothing but faith. But what good is a palace when the queen sleeps alone? Mrs. Jackson? It was Nina, the housekeeper, her voice gentle but hesitant. "I brought your tea." Sarah forced a smile, the kind that hides pain better than words ever could. "Thank you, Nina. Just leave it on the table." Nina lingered for a moment, then said quietly, "Mr. Jackson called. He said he won't be home tonight. Business trip. Chicago." Sarah nodded slowly. "Of course," she said, her voice steady, but her heart broke all over again. When Nina left, Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Chicago. Yes. The city of skyscrapers, and now the city of betrayal. Sarah rose and walked toward the grand window overlooking the rose garden she had designed herself. The roses were in bloom, deep crimson, vibrant and alive, mocking her fragility. Once upon a time, Tony used to bring her red roses every Friday, back when they still shared laughter and poverty, back when love was simple and pure. Now he brought diamonds and silence. And neither sparkled the way they used to. She picked up her phone again. Still no reply. The screen felt heavier than glass, heavier than truth. Her fingers hovered over his name one last time, then dropped it. Instead, she whispered to the quiet room, "I can't do this anymore." And in that whisper, her life began to change. Before we continue, dear viewer, take a moment. Wherever you're watching from, the city, the countryside, your quiet corner of the world, I want you to comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me this. Do you believe love can survive betrayal? I read every word. And if you believe in second chances, in redemption, in love that endures storms, then don't forget to subscribe. Because this story is for hearts like yours. Now, let's return to Sarah. She walked toward the closet, larger than the entire apartment they'd once shared when life was young and raw and real. Rows of dresses lined the space, designer tags glinting in soft lamplight. Each dress a memory. Each one a mask. None of it mattered now. She reached for a small suitcase, one she hadn't touched in years. It was time to leave the palace that had become her prison. Time to stop waiting for a man who had already left. As she packed, memories flooded in. The day of their wedding, the church was small, the flowers were borrowed, but Tony's smile had been genuine. The day they celebrated their first million, they danced barefoot in the kitchen, champagne in paper cups. The night they moved into this mansion, he'd whispered, "We made it." She had believed him then. Now she knew. They had made wealth, not happiness. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her sister, Zora. "Hey, sis," came the voice on the other end, warm but tense. "How did the appointment go?" Sarah hesitated. Then, quietly, "It's cancer, Zora. Stage 3. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Zora's voice, trembling but strong. "Where's Tony?" Sarah almost laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Chicago," she said. "With her." That was all Zora needed to hear. "I'm coming to get you," she said firmly. "You're not doing this alone. Pack a bag. I'll be there in an hour." Sarah's eyes welled up, but no tears fell. They were beyond that now. "I already started packing," she whispered. "Good," Zora said softly. "You deserve peace, Sarah. Real peace." After the call ended, Sarah turned to her vanity mirror. The woman staring back was someone she barely recognized, tired eyes, weary shoulders, a soul stretched thin. But beneath the exhaustion, something glimmered. Not anger. Not fear. But resolve. She would fight this cancer, with or without him. And she would live. Not survive, live. She placed her wedding ring on the pillow beside Tony's. Next to it, she left a note. "When you decide to come home, I won't be here. I have cancer, and I'm fighting it without you. Goodbye, Tony." She closed the suitcase, took one last look around the room, and whispered to the silence. "I loved you. But I love myself now, too." As she descended the grand staircase, her heels clicked softly against the marble, a sound that once meant elegance, now liberation. The house stood still, every chandelier and corner watching her departure like a ghost witnessing its own end. She reached the front door and stepped outside into the cool night. The air wrapped around her, cold, honest, free. She sat on the front steps, suitcase by her side, staring at the distant stars. And for the first time in months, she didn't wait for him to come home. Her phone buzzed again. Tony's name flashed across the screen. Text, "Late meeting. Don't wait up." Sarah smiled sadly. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I won't." Moments later, headlights cut through the darkness. Zora's car pulled into the driveway. Sarah stood, took one final look at the mansion, the golden cage she had once called home, and walked away without looking back. And just like that, the chapter she never thought she'd write began. A story of illness, betrayal, and the rediscovery of self. A story that would change not only her life, but his. Because when Tony finally came home, the only thing waiting for him was her absence. And sometimes, absence is the loudest teacher of all. Morning came quietly. The mansion, once filled with echoes of life, now stood still, a monument to what happens when love is neglected. Tony Jackson stirred in a Chicago penthouse, silk sheets tangled around his restless form. The night before had been another blur of laughter, wine, and empty promises whispered by Angela Frederick, the woman who looked at him the way success once did, with admiration. But even admiration, when undeserved, becomes poison. Angela stretched, sunlight spilling over her skin like liquid fire. "Coffee," she murmured, her tone sweet and practiced. Tony nodded absently. His mind was elsewhere, flickering with vague unease. He picked up his phone. 5 missed calls from Sarah. For a second, something twisted inside him, guilt, or maybe fear. He pushed it away. Later, he thought. I'll call later. Everything okay? Angela asked. Yeah, he lied, setting the phone face down. Just work stuff. He told himself Sarah had changed, that she didn't understand him anymore, that she wanted to slow down when the world demanded he speed up. It was easier to believe that than to face the truth. He was the one who had changed. The more he gained, the less he gave. Later that morning, as Angela hummed in the kitchen, Tony scrolled through his emails. One message stood out, from his assistant. "Mrs. Jackson called the office looking for you. Said it was urgent." Tony frowned. He typed back mechanically. "Tell her I'm in meetings all day." When Angela returned with his coffee, she found him distant, fingers drumming against the table. "All work and no play makes Tony a dull boy," she teased, sitting on his lap. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, when sleep refused him, he stared at the ceiling. He thought of Sarah, the way she used to sit across from him, her laughter filling their kitchen as she scribbled business plans on napkins. He thought of the time they shared their first bottle of champagne in the dark, promising never to lose sight of love, no matter how rich they became. He had lost sight anyway. And yet, even then, he didn't call. The silence between them stretched across miles like an invisible wall. The next morning, his phone rang. "Home." Tony answered immediately, his voice rough from unease. "Maria?" "Mr. Jackson," her voice trembled. "Mrs. Jackson, she's gone." His chest tightened. "What do you mean gone?" "She left last night, sir. Her sister came to get her. She left something for you on your pillow." Tony froze. "I'll be home this afternoon," he said quietly, and hung up. Angela watched him from the doorway, frowning. "Problem?" He grabbed his jacket. "Family emergency," he said shortly. The drive back from Chicago felt endless. Rain traced thin lines across his windshield as guilt gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. He replayed every unanswered call, every excuse, every night he chose luxury over love. By the time he reached their estate, the guilt had turned to dread. He entered the mansion and was met by silence. No soft music, no scent of Sarah's perfume lingering in the air. Just emptiness. He took the stairs 2 at a time and pushed open their bedroom door. Everything looked untouched, until his eyes fell on the bed. There, gleaming faintly in the light, lay her wedding ring. Beside it, a folded note. He opened it with trembling hands. "When you decide to come home, I won't be here. I have cancer, and I'm fighting it without you. Goodbye, Tony." The words hit like a blow to the chest. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the note trembling in his hand, his breath shallow. Cancer. She had been sick, and he hadn't been there. He had ignored her calls, her pleas, for this. The room began to blur. He covered his face with his hands and whispered the only word left to him. God. Sometimes, regret doesn't roar, or it whispers. It seeps into your chest and stays there, like a ghost that refuses to leave. Tony tried calling Sarah's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried Zora next. She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp as glass. You have some nerve calling here. Where is she? He demanded. Where were you, Tony? She shot back. Where were you when your wife was waiting for her test results alone? When she was crying herself to sleep while you were out with that woman? I didn't know, he said weakly. You didn't care, Zora corrected. Now you do, because she's gone. Please, Tony's voice cracked. I need to talk to her. She doesn't want to talk to you. She's finally putting herself first. She's my wife, he whispered. You should have remembered that, Zora said, her voice breaking with anger, before you threw her away. Then she hung up. What once was luxury now felt like punishment. The house he'd bought to prove he'd made it now mocked him with its silence. He looked around at the paintings, the chandelier, the untouched meals. What good is success if the price is loneliness? He reached for the framed photo on the nightstand, their 10th anniversary picture. Sarah leaning into him, eyes bright with love and pride. When had he stopped seeing her? When had he started treating her devotion like background noise? He pressed the photo to his chest and whispered, I'll find you, Sarah. I'll make this right. 2 days later, he found her. At the Detroit Metropolitan Cancer Center. He stood outside the oncology department, hands shaking, staring through the glass at her. Sarah sat in the waiting area, her face pale but calm, her sister beside her. He almost didn't recognize her. The strength in her stillness broke him more than her tears ever could. Zora noticed him first. Her eyes narrowed. You shouldn't be here. I just want to talk to her, he said quietly. She doesn't need you confusing her right now. She's my wife, he repeated, this time, not as a claim, but as a confession. Zora studied him for a long moment, then sighed. She's in room 214. 5 minutes. Her expression shifted, shock, then guarded calm. You found me. He nodded, voice breaking. I read your note. Sarah. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Her voice was low, steady. I tried to tell you, Tony. 5 times. You were too busy. He flinched. I know. I have no excuse. But please, let me be here for you now. Now, she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Now that I'm sick? Now that you've lost control of me? He moved closer, desperate. This isn't about control. It's about love. Love, she whispered. Love doesn't vanish when the calendar fills up, Tony. Love doesn't forget to come home. He fell to his knees beside her chair. I was wrong. I lost myself chasing success, and I lost you along the way. Please, Sarah, give me a chance to make it right. She turned away, tears glimmering. It's too late. Then let me stay anyway, he said. Even if you never forgive me. Just let me stay. Zora entered quietly, ready to intervene. Sarah looked from her sister to Tony, the man who had broken her, kneeling now in humility she'd never seen before. After a long pause, she whispered, "I have surgery next week. If you really want to help, pray I wake up." And sometimes, grace is not forgiveness, it's a doorway left slightly open. The week of the surgery, Tony cancelled every meeting, every trip. He lived at the hospital, pacing corridors, talking to doctors, bringing flowers he wasn't sure she'd ever accept. On the morning of the operation, he placed 3 red roses, her favorite, beside her bed with a note. "Fighting with you from afar. T." Hours passed. The surgery was long. Tony sat beside Zora, who refused to look at him, flipping through a magazine she never read. After 4 hours, the surgeon, Dr. Patel, emerged. "The surgery went well," she said with a gentle smile. "We removed the tumor successfully. Early tests show no spread. She'll be in recovery soon." Tony exhaled sharply, emotion flooding his chest. Zora watched him, the remorse, the hope, and something in her softened slightly. "She's strong," she said. "Stronger than you ever gave her credit for." Tony nodded. "She always has been." When he saw Sarah again, she looked fragile, her skin pale against white sheets. He stood quietly at first, afraid to intrude. Then her eyes opened. "You're still here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. Her lips curved faintly. "You should have said that months ago." "I should have done a lot of things," he said softly. "But I'll start now." "Rest," she murmured. "I'm too tired to fight with you today." "Then I'll fight for you," he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't ask him to leave. And that silence, that small mercy, became the first step toward something neither of them dared to name yet. Tony sitting beside her bed, reading quietly. Zora watching from the hallway, uncertain. The nurse adjusting Sarah's blanket as Tony brings her water. Night fading into morning, he's still there. Days passed. Sarah began to regain strength. The doctors called her recovery remarkable. When it was time to go home, she hesitated. "Home," she said softly. "I'm not sure where that is anymore." "Come back to the house," Tony said. "At least until you're stronger. I've arranged the guest suite so you won't have to climb stairs." She looked at him, weary but curious. "And where will you stay?" "In another room," he promised. "Unless you tell me otherwise." Zora watched the exchange quietly. "Maybe it's not a bad idea," she said later, as she helped her sister pack. "He's trying, Sarah. Really trying." Sarah sighed. "I know. But trying doesn't erase betrayal." "No," Zora said gently. "But it might start healing it." That evening, when Sarah returned to the mansion, the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Tony had redecorated her room, soft colors, sunlight streaming through sheer curtains. Her favorite books waited on the bedside table. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Because you deserve peace," he said. "And because love without action isn't love at all." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I need time." "You can have all the time you need," he said. "I'm not leaving." Forgiveness is not a single decision. It's a journey, one step, one breath, one sleepless night at a time. And though Sarah didn't know it yet, the man who had broken her heart would soon become the one who held it together. Healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with consistency, small gestures repeated in silence, long after the apologies fade. For weeks, Sarah watched Tony through that quiet lens of doubt. He woke up early, made her breakfast, handled the smallest details she once managed alone. He didn't try to impress her with grand gestures. He simply showed up, every day. And for a woman who had been abandoned at her most fragile, showing up meant everything. Tony, green tea with honey, just how you like it. Sarah, you remembered. Tony, I'm trying to remember everything I forgot. She gives a small smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes, or not yet, but close. Trust wasn't something Sarah could rebuild overnight. But in the small silences, the space between his words and his actions, something inside her began to thaw. Weeks passed. The scars from her surgery faded. The color returned to her cheeks. The chemotherapy sessions came and went, and every time, Tony was there. Not as a CEO. Not as the man who broke her heart. But as a husband trying to learn how to love again. Sarah sits reclined in a chair, for attached, her eyes half closed. Tony sits beside her, reading aloud from her favorite novel. His voice trembles slightly over the words. And she realized that love was not about never falling, but about who helped her rise. Sarah smiles faintly. That's ironic. Tony chuckles softly. Poetic irony suits us. A pause. Then she says quietly, you don't have to stay every time. He closes the book, meeting her gaze. Yes, I do. Love, in its truest form, is not loud. It's the steady hand holding yours when everything else hurts. Its presence, simple, undemanding, and real. That night, when they returned home, Sarah felt weaker than usual. Her head throbbed. Her hand shook as she reached to remove her scarf. Tufts of hair had begun to fall out in uneven strands. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was strong, but changed. Tony stood behind her quietly. When she whispered, "It's all coming out," he stepped closer. "Then let me help," he said softly. When it was done, he looked at her, tears glimmering in his eyes. "You are still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he whispered. She turned toward him, raw, vulnerable, bare. "Say that again," she said softly. He did. Not as a line, but as a prayer. The next morning, when she awoke, she found a small velvet box on her nightstand. Inside was a silk scarf, deep blue and gold, her favorite colors. A note tucked beneath it read, "For the woman who taught me that beauty is not what's seen, it's what survives." She pressed the fabric to her heart and closed her eyes. Little by little, the fractures began to mend. Not because Tony begged, but because he proved. Because love, once wounded, does not heal through promises, it heals through patience. Months later, Sarah's health improved. The scan showed progress, strength. Her laughter, once buried under exhaustion, began to return in small, surprising bursts. One evening, she found Tony in his study surrounded by papers, contracts, legal drafts, and documents. "What are you working on?" she asked. He looked up, smiling gently. Something that should have been done a long time ago. He handed her a folder. Inside were legal papers naming her co-chair of Jackson Tech, equal in authority to him. Sarah blinked. "Equal? You've always been," he said quietly. I just needed the courage to admit it. Tears welled in her eyes. This is everything I ever asked for, not power, just recognition. And love, he added softly. Don't forget that. She smiled through tears. That too. And sometimes, the second act of love is quieter, not a grand proposal, not flowers or rings, but a partnership reborn from ashes. Time moved forward. Sarah finished her last round of chemotherapy. Dr. Patel's words came like music, "You're in remission." Sarah laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in a year. Tony stood beside her, tears streaming down his face. They walked out of the hospital hand in hand, not as husband and wife who had survived betrayal, but as two souls reborn. A few weeks later, the sun melted over the water in hues of pink and gold. Sarah stood on the deck, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. Tony joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. You kept your promise, she said, smiling. You built the lake house I always dreamed of. I built it for you, he said. But I'm grateful you let me share it. They watched the sun sink together in silence, the kind that no longer hurt. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply allows the future to exist. Later that evening, Tony brought out another envelope, this time, plain and unassuming. Before I give you this, he said, I want to tell you something. He took her hands. When you left, I thought I lost my wife. But what I really lost was the man I used to be. And when you came back, you didn't just heal from cancer, Sarah. You healed me too. She felt tears rise. Open it, he said. Inside was the deed to the lake house, signed entirely in her name. Her breath caught. Tony, I can't. You can, he said. Because this is what you built, not the house, but the peace. You earned it. They spent that night talking for hours, about dreams, faith, even fears. Sarah confessed how she still had nightmares of being alone. Tony admitted that every morning he woke fearing she'd change her mind and leave. They didn't hide anymore. They didn't pretend. They were real, imperfect, open, whole. Weeks later, at dawn, Tony found Sarah outside writing by the water. What are you working on? He asked. She smiled faintly. My book. About us. About hope, she said. About the kind of love that survives everything, even the people who tried to destroy it. He sat beside her. And how does it end? She looked at him, eyes glimmering. It doesn't. It keeps going. Snow fell softly outside. Zora and her children filled the living room with laughter. Tony cooked, clumsily, but sincerely. Sarah arranged ornaments, humming under her breath. Everything was simple. Everything was beautiful. At midnight, Tony brought her outside, the sky glowing with snowflakes and stars. I never gave you a real gift that meant something, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a gold locket, engraved with 2 images. On one side, their wedding day, young, naive, and in love. On the other, a recent photo, her bald head wrapped in her blue scarf, his hand clasping hers at the hospital. This, he said softly, is who we were, and who we became. She touched the locket, tears streaming down. And both are beautiful, she whispered. Sometimes love's most sacred vows are not spoken in church, but whispered after midnight, by 2 people who almost lost everything, and chose to start again. Sarah stands before a small crowd on the lake house lawn. Family, friends, and Dr. Patel watch as she and Tony exchange renewal vows. Her voice is steady, her eyes radiant. "Tony, I loved you once with innocence. I love you now with understanding. We are not who we were, and that's the miracle." Tony takes her hands. "Sarah, I broke what I thought could never be broken. But your grace rebuilt it stronger. I vow to never take a single moment for granted again." They exchange simple gold bands, not to replace the old ones, but to mark a new beginning. And so, the woman who once sat alone in a navy blue dress, holding a phone that never rang, now stood reborn in the arms of the man who finally learned that love is not about having everything, but cherishing the one thing that truly matters. This was not a story about cancer, nor about betrayal. It was a story about what remains after both: faith, forgiveness, and love that learns how to stay.